The story of Rush in the scheme of rock history has got to be one of the more courageous and least glamorous of all. Panned or ignored for years by almost everyone with a pen or a microphone, Rush has succeeded to the platinum degree on the strength of their musicianship and uncompromising devotion to their music. If there was ever a band supported solely by its fans, it would have to be Rush. During the next 2 hours, we'll profile the history and music of this Canadian trio, Alex Lifeson, Neil Peart, and Geddy Lee. Rush, Underdogs on Top. Tom Sawyer from last year's Moving Pictures album on the Rush Special. Canada's contribution to the music of the 60s was basically limited to the Guess Who, Joni Mitchell, and Gordon Lightfoot. 1968 in Toronto saw the beginnings of Rush. Guitarist Alex Lifeson formed a band with drummer John Rutsey and a bass player. For this source event, Alex recalls asking his friend Geddy Lee to join that band.
Oftentimes, because I didn't have an amp, I'd call Get Up and ask him if I could borrow his amp. And I called him up this one day, and right away he thought, oh, he's going to want my amp. And I said, listen, do you think that you could come and play with us? Because Jeff is not coming, and we don't have a bass player. And we have this gig tonight, and we'll just play the songs. Because Ged and I used to hang around in his basement and my basement and work together all the time learning songs and stuff. And he said, well, all right.
For 6 years, Rush played high schools and bars around Toronto, performing mostly their own material. In 1974, whenever they could spare the time, they recorded their first album.
We got to the point where it was time to do some recording, and we decided to do it on our own. There wasn't really too much interest as far as getting in advance to get in a studio, so we had to spread it out. We'd take one day here and then not record for a month or two and take a couple of days, and the first album was done like that.
Vocalist and bass player Geddy Lee.
Well, no one wanted to sign us in Canada, and we thought we had something to offer somebody, so our manager had enough belief to hustle some cash up and we started our own label.
Longtime Rush manager Ray Daniels.
London Records at the time said to me that they wouldn't take the record, but if I wanted to form my own label, they'd distribute it. That was the best offer we'd had.
It didn't cost a whole lot to do that at the time, and the album was really made with a very low budget, but I mean, it had some essence of something in there. I don't know, some people still prefer it to anything we've done in our more sophisticated period, I guess, but I'm not one of those people. But it did have something. I think it had some sort of appeal in a raw sense.
Eventually, that record found its way to the all-important American market. Alex.
A copy made its way down to Cleveland to a radio station, and the program director there, and she passed it on to Mercury Records.
Coinciding with their contract with Mercury was a debut U.S. tour in August of 1974. Just prior to their opening show in Pittsburgh, drummer John Rutsey left the band, and auditions were held to find his replacement. Neil Peart was chosen. Geddy.
It's the only audition we've ever held. I think we had 2 or 3 drummers before Neil, and we had one after Neil. And after we heard Neil play, like there's no one that could come after the guy, you know? So we were pretty convinced, at least I was in my own mind, that he was definitely the drummer for the band.
Alex Lifeson.
I remember I had reservations because I really wasn't sure. It was the second guy we tried, and who knows, maybe there's going to be 3 or 4 other guys that might be as good. So it was a bit weird. And we sat down, we talked a lot. Geddy and him talked mostly, and they hit it off immediately. I guess I had those reservations, so I wasn't sure.
Drummer Neil Peart.
It was funny because Geddy and I hit it off right away conversationally. We had a lot in common in terms of books and music. So many bands that we both liked. And Alex, for some reason, was in a bad mood that day, so we didn't have anything to say to each other, really. And playing together, we did what eventually became Anthem, in fact. We fooled around with some of those rhythmic ideas and jammed away on this and that. And I thought it was a disaster, and I think that's generally the case with auditions. You always think it went horribly, and you never, you played about 10% as good as you should have, and you'll never get the gig and all that. And I felt terrible about it, and I thought, oh, this was awful. But I guess, the chemistry was right, that's all.
The chemistry was right. Rush was intact. The tour ended, and the band returned to Toronto to record their second album, Fly By Night. That's coming up when the Rush Special continues from The Source. But also a lyricist. Neil has written most of the band's lyrics since their second LP, Fly By Night. Alex.
Ged and I weren't into it. The first album, Ged wrote most of the lyrics, all but one song. With Fly By Night, we weren't really into it, so we figured if Neil was into it, fine. You know, when we're writing music, it's always difficult for a drummer to take a really strong role in the actual melodic writing of a song. So we do that between us, and he took on the lyrics.
Neil, asked to write lyrics by default, felt he really enjoyed his new role.
I'd written like 2 songs before that, and it was even quite a few years before. And basically it was because nobody else was going to do it, you know, and it was by default. And I thought, well, I've always been interested in words. I've always loved to read. I thought, well, I'll give it a try and see how it comes out. So I wrote a couple of songs and showed them to the guys, and they liked them. So it gave me the encouragement to keep going. It became an obsession, too.
In 1975, Rush received their first Juno Award, the Canadian equivalent of a Grammy, as Most Promising New Group. That fall, their third LP and first concept album, Caress of Steel, was released. Alex Lifeson.
Again, Neil wrote the lyrics for The Fountain of Lambeth, and he thought it would be kind of nice to try to incorporate a very loose concept in it by having a starting point and ending point, which would go from the beginning of side 2 to the end of side 2, and it would be one complete story, but broken up so that it could be individual songs that, unless you look closely, wouldn't necessarily relate to each other.
Heard 2112. Alex.
We worked very, very hard, and all of a sudden we weren't getting any support. And by the nature of the way our deal was set up at the record company, we had freedom to do musically what we wanted. And okay, of course, it still maybe didn't do well commercially, and we lost a lot of support from people around us, but it was an important stepping stone for us. We had to try some things out, and so we did. And then 2112 came by, and it's a very aggressive album. When I listen to it, which is, I haven't heard it in quite a long time, but every once in a while you hear a cut on the radio, the whole feel of it is very tense and aggressive. And I think it was because we were in that space at the time. We had to decide whether we were going to say, okay, we give up, we either break up, or we try to make another first album, or we say, forget it to everybody and do whatever we want. And we decided on the third.
2112 on the Rush special. 2112 was Rush's breakthrough album in the U.S., and the first to feature their Star in a Circle logo, designed by their friend Hugh Syme. Geddy Lee.
Hugh Syme designed that. Once he received the lyrics for 2112 and heard some of the music and knew what the album was, sort of what direction the album was going, then he designed the graphics to go along with it, and he came up with the design. It sort of come to us to sort of stand for individualism and sort of man against the masses.
Up next, all the world's a stage of things and hemispheres, when the Rush special continues from the source. During this period, the possibility of adding a fourth member to the band was discussed. Geddy Lee.
We went through a period where we wanted to add someone else, but we were really nervous about doing that because in the history of most bands I've been in, I mean, I've been in Rush almost all my life, but we've gone through different phases in our sort of prehistory where we've had 4 guys and then gone back to 3 and had 4 guys and gone back to 3. And every time we've added a fourth, I don't know, it's not the same. It's real easy to communicate with 3 people. As soon as you bring a fourth in, you have danger of, you can have 2 sides, you know? 2 against 1 isn't fair, so 3 works that way. But 2 against 2 is fair. So you have a stalemate, and the group sort of breaks off into factions. So I think we've had this real fear of losing the communication by adding another member. So at that time, after the live album, we decided that we would rather push ourselves by playing other instruments than risk putting our communication in jeopardy.
Following a lengthy and highly successful British and European tour, in 1977, Rush stayed in Europe to record their next album, A Farewell to Kings. Once again, Neil was responsible for writing most of the lyrics.